Well, welcome everyone. My name is Don Fick and I'm an amateur astronomer with the Astronomical League, and I'd like to welcome you to this fun program tonight. We're going to talk about launching a library telescope program. We have Marc Stowbridge, he's with the New Hampshire Astronomical Society. Many of us call him lovingly the father of the library telescope program. He's one that helped get this thing started. It's been since 2009. We have more than 40 states, actually 44 something states, and a little bit in Europe. It's a really big program, and I think you're going to have fun hearing what Marc has to say tonight. And you can see a picture of him actually working right there on the telescope. So I'm going to turn it over to Marc, and I will ask that if you have questions, if you're on Zoom, you can actually type them into the Zoom chat. If you're on Facebook Live, just put it in the comments area, and we'll be able to answer those when we get done with his presentation, which should last about 20 minutes or so. Our overall program is about 30 minutes. And I look forward to hearing what Marc has to say. So I'm going to turn over to Marc. And Marc, you want to get started?
Okay, hi everyone. As you no doubt know, the Library Telescope program.
Live, just put it in the comments area.
Still there?
Yeah, sorry.
Oh, good.
Yeah, there you
go. As I was saying, as you no doubt know, the Library Telescope program puts small telescopes into libraries where they can be checked out like a book. We use the Orion Starblast 4.5 tabletop and other equivalent scopes, and I'll talk more about that in a bit. I get a lot of questions. The first is, why the Starblast? Well, it's got good optics, doesn't have a tripod, because most inexpensive telescopes have wobbly tripods, which turn them into either weather vanes or seismographs. So for this, you'll need a table or a milk crate or two. Or if you're more flexible than I am, you could just put it on the ground. Very, very sturdy. Let's see. We also fiddle with the telescopes a lot, and I'll talk a bit more about that later on. Because most any telescope you give to a novice is not going to work out well. So how did all this start? There's another question I get a lot. Is back in about 2009, I placed the first telescope in my local library here in New Hampshire. I was the coordinator of our club's public outreach, and we have a very active outreach program when not hampered by COVID. And we hold many sky watches at libraries. Back then, we had one library that rather unexpectedly donated $200 to the club, which hardly ever happens. And there was much discussion as to what to do with it. I thought that we could buy them a telescope that they could check out like a book, seeing how they seem to be so interested in astronomy. The other question I get often is, why put these in libraries and not schools? Well, libraries delight in sending things home with people, schools not so much, and they're closed in the summer. Besides, schools would only use them every once in a while, and by putting them in libraries, they can be used by homeschoolers, scouts, camps, families, individuals, and when the schools need them, they're right there. And let's see, I guess another slide. Next slide, there we go. There are other effects of the Library Telescope program, though we didn't really realize that or expect them at first, and in no particular order. The LTP is given a chance for families to try astronomy without the frustration of the dread department store telescopes. People have limited resources, couldn't buy a telescope very often, and this way they got a good scope for free. It would help advertise the club and our activities. And our mission as an educational nonprofit is to further public awareness of astronomy, which is often called the gateway drug to the sciences. you would give the club members another way to participate in the club, because not everybody is into sky watches. A lot of us seem to delight in tinkering with telescopes. And that's been a very important part of the program, as you'll see in a slide in a little bit. Actually, slide number, the next one. Aha. Don can talk more about this slide, but this is from the St. Louis Astronomical Society. The New Hampshire Club has modified 20 or 25 scopes at a time. This is, I think, a modification party with about 50 telescopes. And it's just a wonder to behold. The modification parties are usually at some cafeteria that's not being used at the moment. We hold ours at the planetarium in our state capitol. And there's usually soft drinks and pizza around, and there are various stations for the modifications, which I'll talk a little bit more about in a bit. But these are a lot of people that might not otherwise have anything, any activity to do with the club, so it works out very nicely. Also, back to the good parts of the LTP. Interest in astronomy seems to peak twice in life. There's maybe 3 times if you have children, but there's children, parents of children, and then usually later in life, shall we say. And this is reflected a lot in the age of the people in astronomy clubs, which tend to be, well, like me, a bit gray-haired. And next slide, please. Lots of people live in, brilliantly lit areas and can only see a few stars at night. Where my grandson lives, my youngest grandson, there's you can see 3 or 4 stars at night. Here in New Hampshire, the Milky Way casts a shadow. So having a telescope that has a bit of aperture lets you see things you might otherwise never see. I've participated in quite a few sky watches at camps, in particular for kids from cities and the crowded suburbs. And it's been wonderful to see them literally discover the night sky. Even some people who are familiar with stars are rendered speechless or prone to OMG when they see their first planets or Messier objects. The other thing I've been asked is, so you send people out at night with a telescope they've never used before, alone? Well, anyone who's looked through anything more complicated than a magnifying glass knows there can be quite a learning curve. This telescope in particular is very easy to use, particularly as distinct from a lot of the telescopes that one gets at department stores, which are on the aforementioned spindly tripods and often have slow motion controls. The slow motion controls are, well, I liken them to trying to draw a circle with an Etch-a-Sketch. Very frustrating. And don't get me started about German equatorial mounts with beginners. They're hard to set up and not very intuitive. And they have counterweights. They weigh a lot. So the Star Blast is just delightful. You take it, put it on a table, take off the covers, and you're pretty much good to go. The instruction manuals that come with most telescopes are overly complicated and not very durable. One of the things that most people don't realize is that when you go out at night, you get covered with dew. And if you have a wad of paper instructions. By the time you're halfway through setting up, they're just soggy. So we wrote a simple quick start manual that was laminated to withstand a lot of handling, nighttime dew, and could fit in an accessory pouch that we mount on the side of the telescope. In the picture there, I think you'll see just below the optical tube, there's a little blue pouch. And we just strap that on, and that holds all the things that we don't tie down. Next slide. That's a modification party at the New Hampshire Astronomical Society. And it's been delightful. We have, as you can see, youngsters and men and women of various ages come to work on these scopes. As I said, the Star Blast is simple to carry, set up and use, but it has some issues that make it difficult to loan out and for librarians to care for. And we wanted a program that was as easy as possible for the libraries. We didn't want people to lose parts, so most everything with everything on the scope that had like dust covers, we tied on with little strings. We tried using the stock eyepieces. That didn't work terribly well, partially because people had to swap the eyepieces back and forth, and that was just tedious. So we eventually wound up using a zoom eyepiece, and that we could also take out the little thumb screws on the focuser and put in set screws so that once the eyepiece was in place, it just stayed there. And that made it very, very nice. We applied stickers to the telescope to answer the usual question of what power is this telescope? And with the little stickers, one can sort of look over and say, why, at the moment, it's 56 power or whatever it happened to be. And we learned by experience what we needed to tinker with. Folks often left the red dot finder on, and that killed the rather expensive little button batteries. And so we started attaching battery packs to the side of the finder scope that used AA batteries. That made it much easier to fix, and AA batteries are everywhere, and those little nickel batteries, not so much. My daughter and I were talking about diagnostic terminology some years ago, and she came up with ADOS for attention deficit. Oh, shiny. The short version of that is squirrel. The collimation screws on the back of the scope were just waiting for somebody to fiddle with them. And after the first telescope in my town library was brought back with the primary mirror literally flopping around inside the tube, I replaced those chrome bits with locking hex nuts. You could still align the mirror, it just took an 8mm wrench to do it. The Star Blast is the typical telescope we use, but now there's a number of other scopes that are close equivalents. We find, though, that the Star Blast is probably the easiest of all the scopes to work with. Some groups have opted for the 6-inch model, but it lacks the portability of the 4.5. And others have chosen smaller telescopes because they're less expensive, but they lack the magnification ability of the 4.5. I also found it an important aspect of the Star Blast is that many people find it impressive. It looks like a telescope. Smaller versions tend to look like toys. And part of the appeal of the Library Telescope program is the idea that you're using a real telescope and being good goods, as it were. One should take it seriously and protect it. Everything about the scope, everything about the telescope package is an attempt to increase the durability of the equipment and reduce frustration. In the accessory patch, we put in a red light off and a headlamp, um, and I'll talk about some of the other things in there in a moment. Because knowing what to look like is a big part of an enjoyable experience. And I think we're ready for the next slide. Oh, good. Here in New Hampshire, we're providing a 16-inch plastic planisphere as a separate service to libraries. They don't fit in the pouch and don't provide an explanation of what things are, but they make it much, much easier for people to visualize the whole sky. And because they're plastic, I've heard of people taking them into the hot tub with them, and that's delightful. A lot of planispheres are very small and hard to read, particularly at night, and a lot of them are cardboard, which, as I said, does not do well with dew. We also provide a copy of the National Audubon Society Pocket Guide to the Constellations. This is a 4-inch by 6-inch book that has very easy charts and clear descriptions of the night sky, sorted by season and direction. It also fits in the pouch. The instructions for the telescope refer to this book, so there's more continuity and support. I sometimes refer to this book as the best guide to the visible universe for less than 20 Altarian dollars a day. Next slide, please. That's it. Wonderful book. You can get them most everywhere, and they're certainly orderable online. There's also lots and lots of videos on how to use and modify the Star Blast. The New Hampshire Astronomical Society, which is has 6 videos on its website, and YouTube has tons more. Now, having pity on the poor library science major, when introducing the library telescope to the staff, we go over the telescope and the accessories so they know what to catalog. We also tell them about the resources available to them and to the patrons. The cataloging is an important part because they need to know what goes out and make sure that everything that's supposed to come back comes back in one piece. We've had very little trouble with damage and very little trouble with misplaced items. Another place for resources for librarians is the Cornerstone of Science program. There's a link to Cornerstones on the Librarytelescopeorg site, and I speak about them a little bit more later on. We encourage the librarians to take the scope home and play with it, starting during the day with the telescope on their kitchen table. Getting to know the scope when it's warm and bright around you is much easier than when it's not. This lets the staff reassure the reluctant borrower and say with some authority that it's actually pretty easy to use. Next slide, please. Ta-da! The only maintenance library staff have to ensure is that all the pieces come back and the red dot finder and headlamp have good batteries. Now, people will fiddle with the finder scope, but the instructions address how to adjust it, and that hasn't reported to me to be a problem. That picture has the Audubon Society guide and the instruction manual right there on the base. Next slide, please. There are no official ways to do things with the scope, but experience has shown us some best practices. For instance, I don't recommend loaning the scope in a tote or a crate. That takes 2 hands and lets the scope rattle around a bit. It's better, in my humble opinion, to put your forearm under the telescope and hold it to your side. That leaves a hand free for doors and children. There are a few different ways to modify the scopes. What you choose to do depends on your skill and aesthetics. When I first modified the scope, some of the things I did were a bit labor intensive as compared to others, but I frankly never expected to have to modify so many telescopes. We've got over 160 in our small state, I think. So, um, like in this picture, their manual is big. That's all right. They figured out a way to put that in and it makes them comfortable. Other people do things to protect the collimation screws, including just putting a sticker on the back of the scope saying, don't touch these knobs, which seems to work. Now, as far as transporting the telescope in your car, um, you just put it on the seat, put a seat belt across the bottom, and have the tube upright, and the chest strap goes across the tube. No need for a crate. Most libraries keep the telescopes out where they can be seen. As long as the dust covers are on, dust isn't a problem. And initial worries that some of the telescopes might be hard for the libraries to care for have been largely dispelled. Local astronomy clubs often sponsor the scopes and provide upkeep services. I've worked on telescopes that have been in regular use for over 10 years, and the only thing I've had to do is tweak the collimation. And I use a laser for that, and I'm a little OCD about it. But beyond that, I rarely have anything else to repair. The hardest thing about caring for the telescope is finding them in when they're not checked out. Many libraries have reported waiting lists that are months long. So, how do you get started with a new library? Well, there have been many articles written about how libraries of books are morphing into libraries of things. In many towns, you can borrow tools, sporting equipment, cake pans, and other things that won't fit through your internet connection. Telescopes were an early entry to this phenomenon. The first telescope, as I said, went into my hometown library because I could keep track of it. Also, being a small town, the librarian knew me. When I first approached her with the plan, she took it to the board for consideration. It helped that we have a very enlightened board, and the only discussion about it was who would get to try it first. The librarian pulled rank and got it. It's a known fact that librarians talk to each other. Our neighboring towns heard about the telescope, perhaps not to be outdone, wanted one for themselves. When we first started the program in New Hampshire, the program took some explaining. Now we receive requests. One astronomical group told me that when they approach a librarian, they simply unfold the Sky and Telescope article, check out this telescope, and just let them read it. And at this point, I'd be surprised if there's a librarian that hasn't heard about the program. So what does it cost? Well, the package is somewhere between $325 and $350. Your mileage may vary. Here in New Hampshire, we found that lots of people were happy to sponsor a telescope for their library, often in honor of or in memory of someone. Companies also provide many telescopes, particularly in the more urban areas. The website Librarytelescopeorg has lots of information about starting a program. A lot of feedback from libraries states that the telescopes are very popular and bring people into the library that otherwise might not. And they mostly loan out the scopes for 1 week at a time to card-holding adults. Now, just how popular is this? Well, when I first started this, I told the club here in New Hampshire that my goal was maybe placing 3, possibly 4 telescopes a year. I thought we could do that without too much trouble or hurting our bank account too much. Well, librarytelescope.org has a list of participating libraries that have signed in. I just spoke to a librarian yesterday where I found that they had a telescope and hadn't signed in yet. And so I pointed them in the right direction, and so that should be fun. It turned out that that was in a town I lived in when I was about 6, and it was in my backyard in that town that I saw Sputnik fly over. So that was really where I got interested in all of this. Now, let's see. Oh, how about the next slide? I got an email from the librarians at the Westminster Reference Library in London. They wanted to set up a program. Their building is on top of the foundation of Isaac Newton's old house and has vaulted arches in the basement that date back from then. The British magazine Astronomy Now ran an article that was very supportive of the program, and I think that's also available at the Librarytelescope.org site. The librarians asked me how they might thank me because I spent a fair amount of time helping them get their program running, and I asked for a picture of the basement of the library, and they said it was under construction more or less at the time because there was building going on around it, so there are all kinds of supports in place, but they sent me a picture of it. The next slide. So that's the article, and that's a picture of Isaac Newton in his old house wafting through. I sometimes cruise the internet searching for the Library Telescope program, though not all organizations use that as a title. For instance, Cornerstones of Science in Brunswick, Maine, is a great resource for telescopes and telescope kits at minimum cost. They're also a nonprofit. They call their version the STAR program for sharing telescopes and astronomical resources, and they've placed hundreds of scopes. There's also the Lone Star program, and a recent search for Library Telescope program in quotes yielded 3,990 hits. Most of them were from local papers as well as libraries and clubs. Next slide. The Astronomical League has given away 10 Star Blasts to member clubs for the past few years. And it's also just announced a new observing award for developing local library telescope programs. This is having a sort of a Johnny Appleseed effect and scattering library programs across the country. It's been wonderful. So where are the programs? Well, there's a lot of them, and the program is expanding week to week. And I'll close with my fond saying of today, New Hampshire, tomorrow, the world. And that would close out me. There's a picture of all the states that have reported having library telescopes. And they're also, as I'm not sure I said, New Zealand, Chile, Amsterdam, lots in Canada. They're all over the place now. It's far exceeded what I ever hoped for. Thank you very much. And I'll turn it back over to Don.
Okay, Mark, thanks. So, well, we've got a number of questions on Facebook right now. The first question is that a multifocal length lens? And if so, what is the focal length range of the zoom eyepiece?
That's a Celestron zoom eyepiece, and it's 8 to 24 millimeters. we say in the instructions to always start off with the uh, highest number, which is the lowest power. The Star Blast has a really, really wide field of view, which is nice because at low power, um, somebody can be looking at the moon and say, "Mom, come here, take a look at this." And she can put down her cup of tea, get up, amble over, take a look in the eyepiece, and it's still going to be in the field of view. A lot of the like 60 millimeter refractors, you'll see the image just go past. This is nice. You can see pretty much the entire Andromeda galaxy. With the Seven Sisters, you see all of them, not just a couple. And at high power, you can zoom in to get quite good detail on things like craters of the moon or some of the brighter, smaller galaxies.
Okay, next question is there a list of standard modifications to the telescope?
If you go to nhastro.com, we're definitely an org, but we're a com. There is the original modification file there that goes over all the things that we do. And there are lots of other sites out there that have variations on the theme. Some folks, as I said, don't fiddle with the collimation screws. Some will actually take like a Tupperware jug and put it over the back, reducing or eliminating contact with them for fiddling fingers. Or as I am fond of saying, children or people acting like children who might otherwise want to see what happens when you twiddle with them. There's no right way of doing it. It's some people aren't comfortable taking the mirror cell apart. It's really not a big deal. You just don't touch the mirror, and that's not hard to do. And I find it no problem. Some people might.
So we also have those, by the way, all those modifications on librarytelescope.org. If you go under program administration and then a submenu, launch your own program, and it'll actually have all the same thing that you're talking about there. So there's a lot of materials actually out there if you look there. Okay, we have another question is, what is a common reason why a library would not want to adopt a program like this?
I'm going to have to think on that because it's really just the opposite. The only thing that comes to mind is here in New Hampshire, and also we do work with the surrounding states, we have some really small libraries. And there are some people who are concerned that they just don't have the space for them. There's one library in particular, though, that was in a storefront, and it's in a very small town. It's in the northern part of the state. And yet they have a telescope and they just have a wonderful time because being a small isolated town like that, it's very unlikely that anybody else would have a telescope, let alone one that they would loan out. It reminds me of the line from The Star Splitter by Robert Frost, and I'll let you look that up.
Okay, we got another question on Facebook. Let's see, where do I go? It said here, what do you think of Zoomel as an alternative to the Orion? Their scopes seem to be bigger and of good quality and a lot cheaper, or a bit cheaper anyway. It's Zoomel. They're asking about Zoomel as an alternative to the Orion. They're saying they might be a bit cheaper and maybe even a little bit bigger.
Oh, hold on just a sec. I'm going to there. Could you say that again, please?
Yeah, so the manufacturer called Zumel, Zhumell.
Oh, yeah, Zoomel.
So they're asking about them, that particular telescope they offer. It's a little bit bigger maybe and a little cheaper.
Um, that's okay with me. When this program first started and I was talking with other clubs, they said, oh, we'll give you credit for this. And I said, a footnote would be nice, but this is your program. Modify things the way you feel comfortable. And, uh, that's getting good equipment out is all I care about. I don't really care what color it is. Um, there are some scopes that are, well, I've used and purchased quite a few of them actually over the years. There's one that looks like a star blast, but the finder scope and focuser will stretch out, making it a longer focal length. And but that leaves the secondary, the diagonal, right open there for fiddling fingers. Now, if you want to get fingerprints on the secondary, you've got to reach in and work at it. Um, Other scopes, uh, well, if it is something you can modify um, and that works well, as I said, there's no correct way of doing it. I'm not keen on the little 70 millimeter uh, first scope um, telescopes for the program, though there's one club in New Zealand that actually that did that because that's what they could afford, and that's fine. Many of us started out with telescopes that were much more limited than that. Um, but I like the idea of something that's, as I said before, impressive. Uh, it's a group in California that uses the 6-inch star blast because they have light polluted skies and they wanted to have a bigger aperture. That's fine. And they're very successful with it.
Okay, so we have actually two questions that I'll put together. One is, does the telescopes get damaged? And also, how long do they last?
What was the first part?
Do the telescopes get damaged? And how long do they last?
Oh, the kinds of things that I have had to repair, it's really only two things. The red dot scopes can be a bit fragile, but I find that the battery pack actually helps with that because it means that people are taking them off less to replace batteries. The other is on the focuser tube, that plastic chrome tube. People will sometimes get to the end of the rack on it, the gears on it, and will try to keep going and will strip them. And Orion has been very kind about providing replacements, either free or cheap. I won't tell you that they're going to give them to you for nothing, but when I bring my repair kit with me, which is just collimation equipment mostly, I have one or two of those in my kit just on the off chance that somebody overextends their trying to focus out. Other than that, um, uh, I had a friend of mine who has rebuilt many of these scopes, and he admits to having dropped one once, and it was fine. Repairs have just not been an issue for us.
Okay, so I have another, it's more of a comment that this viewer has 5 new telescopes that will eventually circulate, and I want everything to come back. So he's excited about that. That's great. And then another club has decided to donate 5 Orion SkyQuest Dobsonian reflector telescopes to a library in Arizona. Can the contact information be added to your list of participating libraries? And I will say yes. You just have to tell us. We actually have a number of libraries that do not have the standard Orion. What we do is we simply asterisk them on the list, but please submit them either through the register place or send us an email through the contact and just let us know the locations. We'll be happy to add those. I also
Yes.
had one. Also, I'm sorry. Would you going to say something, Mark?
Oh, I'm perfectly happy with Dobbs. Um, as long as they're manageable. But the 4 and 6 inch Dobbs in particular are delightful telescopes, and you can get them into a car without any trouble at all. So extra points.
Yeah, there you go. So then I have another question from a viewer, and this person says, does the library need to join an astronomy club or under a club to get to launch a program?
No, not at all. Uh, there's an awful lot of people in every town, it seems, that I've always wanted a telescope, and um, I've found that the libraries have no trouble at all finding somebody who is willing to come in and check up on them. But they're simple enough that the librarians can do all the maintenance that needs to be done on their own. Having a laser collimator just makes it quicker, and having the right sized Allen wrench with you is nice, but they're just not hard to care for.
Well, I think that's all the questions we have here. We have some thank yous, and we should appreciate that. So this program will be, it's been recorded, and we will have it, of course, on Facebook for those of you on Facebook. But we also have been creating a YouTube library. If you go to our librarytelescope.org, just go up the very top right, and there's a YouTube channel up there. So any of these presentations we'll have recorded, and it'll take us a day or so to get it out there, but we're happy to do that. And next month, this will be really exciting. There's a lot of experience out there about how to actually modify the telescope. This one guy, the first guy on this page here, Ron Thompson, I think he's probably done 200 just by himself. And so when you put these guys together, just these 3 right here, there's a lot of telescope modification experience there, and I think you're going to enjoy that. And I'm actually in the St. Louis market, St. Louis metro area. We have 180 telescopes plus in just our St. Louis metro area. So I'll be happy to learn from these guys that are very, very experienced. And this will be on November 18th, same time, basically as this program tonight, 9 o'clock Eastern. And we look forward to you joining us. And by the way, thanks a lot for joining. We had a nice turnout tonight. We appreciate the folks here, not only on Facebook Live, but also on Zoom. And Mark, you did a great job. I know that it was a lot of fun for you to put this together. It's been a lot of fun to be part of it with you. Thank you very much for doing a great job.
Thank you.
So with that, we're going to sign off tonight. And thanks, everyone. Have a good night and be safe.